welcome to the Religion and Popular Culture podcast, where we talk about religion, popular culture, and everything in between. I am your resident anthropologist of religion, Vivian Asimos, and I am here with the sociologist with the mostiologist, Aled Thomas. Aled, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
I am good. I am having a good week. I am excited to be back recording the Religion and Popular Culture podcast for season 3.
Look at us listing our credentials.
Yes. I figured, start of a new season, anybody new kind of joining us for this one, just to let them know
what we do.
Somewhere along the way, someone thought we were adequate enough to give us degrees.
Yes, exactly. That there are some credentials at play here.
Some of them. Whether or not you agree with them is up to you, but we have them. Indeed. And there's no arguing that front. Well, so today, I am excited to be talking about season 2 of Love is Blind, which is a reality TV show on Netflix. Before I get to the show's premise and kind of what we're going to be talking about today, out of curiosity, Aled, what was your experience of Love is Blind prior to me forcing you to watch aspects of this show?
I had seen the Netflix thumbnail when I was scrolling through things to watch. I saw it and thought, and then scrolled on by.
Did they not even give you, like, when you log on and they give, like, the first full ad thing that just auto-plays even if you don't want it to?
Yes.
Was that ever one of them for you?
No. I think that maybe this is quite interesting because it presumably comes down to algorithms. I usually get some sort of sci-fi thing.
Oh, right. Yeah, I was about to say, I get, whenever they put out a new reality show, that is the first thing. I'm sure first on their list of people that they send to watch those things.
Yeah, the way they market these things. No, I usually get a sci-fi thing or occasionally a period drama. Yeah, I don't watch many period dramas, but I do get the ads for them.
Weird.
Yeah, but as we said, we're anthropologists and sociologists. We're not techie people.
Yes. Algorithm discussion will be for a different time.
Yes.
So for people who haven't watched the show, the idea of the show is, interestingly, they always describe themselves not as a reality show, but as a social experiment. And throughout the show, throughout the show, the participants actually refer to it as the experiment or this experiment rather than referring to it as
that sounds a little bit dystopian, doesn't it? The experiment.
I feel like that aspect of it is worth almost an episode in and of itself, but we'll skip that over for today. But basically the idea is that you get a huge group of women and a huge group of men, all heterosexual, because dating shows on reality TV tend to be primarily heterosexual.
I was going to ask about that.
Yes. It would be fascinating to do it the other way, but I guess I wouldn't really... You'd have to, completely isolate people. But anyway. So the idea is that you go into these little pods... and they're like a tiny room that's, I'm sure, soundproofed, so you can't really hear what's going on around it. But it is connected to another little pod on the other side of it. And you talk to each other, one guy in one side and a chick in the other. And you have lengthy conversations with each other where you cannot see the other person. And then through those conversations, which are, it's very shady as to the exact amount of time that people spend in this part of the experiment. But I think it's like a week that all they are doing for at least a week, maybe 2 weeks, all they are doing is just talking to people on these dates, which is intense. And then you, at the end of it, you theoretically will have picked somebody that you want to get married to, and you propose to them.
Such a jump.
Sight unseen. So they still have not seen each other, but they propose in the pods, and then at that point, they are able to see each other. They go off on like a little vacation thing to like really get to know each other, and then they go and they live their normal life for about 2 weeks or so, and then you get married. And the question is whether or not they will actually get married in the end. There's lots of leaving people at altars, because you have to decide in that moment, do you say I do or I don't? It's very dramatic in the way that reality TV likes to be, despite being an experiment.
Yes, very, very staged experiment.
Yeah, so that's the gist of the show. The idea is to try to strip away the whole idea of dating shows of it being about who's hottest. Although, that being said, I don't think they have ever cast anybody who is unattractive. So, take that for what you will.
Yes, very conventionally attractive people with pristine stubble and wonderful nails.
Yeah, like there were a couple of guys on this season 2 that to me looked roughly the same as each other. It's very I mean, I guess in some aspects it is nice for safeguarding purposes that you don't want to accidentally have everybody commenting on how ugly somebody is. That wouldn't be very good for that person's mental health, but at the same time, I mean, are you really questioning whether or not
but then they do
the personality overshows the attractiveness if you're picking only attractive people?
Yeah, they do open the door for that, though, don't they? Because part of the premise of the show is what then happens when they see each other. So there's always that element of two people could... I'm sorry, this is a bit of a tangent, I'm just thinking out loud, but there's always going to be that element of when these two people actually then meet outside of their pods, that regardless of whether they're conventionally attractive or not, there could be that moment where they simply turn around, and I'm sure it has happened, I haven't watched enough of the show, where they just turn around and say, I just do not find this person attractive.
Yeah, and that actually did happen in season 2, but the person who felt that way kind of got branded as the ultimate villain of television, and was, so it... I mean, in some aspects, it's kind of good that it wasn't the woman who was left feeling terrible from other people's treatment of it. Yeah. I mean, from his treatment of her, yes, but not from, like, the society watching.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it does feel a little bad.
Yeah. There's a whole conversation to be had about emotional vulnerability and things on this show, which you and I have had in the past on one of our podcasts about... I think you once told me that Love Island have not necessarily intimacy coaches, but they have people on hand to help guide people now through...
Yes, and Love Island has over time has increased it. I think their early seasons probably didn't really have anybody on hand. But this latest season, they had psychologists and therapists on hand in order to have people there for someone to talk to. They also helped to kind of transition the people from... Basically, before they went on TV, they were... I don't want to say a nobody. That sounds very terrible because everybody is somebody. But they weren't a big public figure, and then suddenly they become a public figure that people are going to be commenting on personal aspects of their life, and training them of how to deal with that became a part of it after some suicides of participants that had been on Love Island. So they did kind of readjust it. I don't know what that looks like for this show. I think that would be something really interesting to get into, but I don't know enough about it to figure it out. Because we talk about religion on this show.
Yes, let's get to that.
So the thing that I wanted to talk about was specifically one of the couples that was on Love is Blind Season 2, Kyle and Shaina. So I am going to, in the description of this episode, I'm going to include the episode number and timestamps that I actually gave Aled for watching this, so that way you don't have to sit through at the very least 6 episodes, but I think there's like 12 or something altogether in the season, to watch all of that just to hear a small snippet of what we're going to be talking about.
You get what you need from a series of short clips. Certainly I feel like I did.
Yeah, so I tried to include as much as I could. I did cut out some aspects of the story, which I'll talk about, but I'll include those clip lengths, like the timestamps and the episode numbers in the description. So if you haven't seen the show, or if you have and you just don't want to rewatch the whole thing, you can remind yourself of what's going on if you want to follow along. But hopefully we'll also summarize things enough that if you don't want to watch and follow along, you can still at least understand slightly of what we're talking about. So, that being said, let's get into Kyle and Shaina. So,
let's talk about Kyle and Shaina.
Let's talk about Kyle and Shaina. I get so excited talking about reality TV. Anyway, so Kyle and Shaina's story, I did cut out some of the aspects in the clips, but the basic premise of their story is that Kyle was pretty much, his number one was Shaina from the very beginning. He was very much into her. Shaina, on the other hand, was choosing between Kyle and Shane, which why you would try to date someone named Shane if your name is Shaina is beyond me. But, you know, to each their own. So she was deciding between those two. Because of a lot of other reasons, she decided to put Shane on the back burner and decided to go with Kyle. Although, one of the things that I did leave out was after they got engaged, she did go back to Shane and tell him that actually she really liked him. And
did Kyle know about that?
He found out about it watching the show.
See, this is all so uncomfortable.
We'll get into it.
Yeah.
But so anyway, but Kyle and Shaina had one really big issue in their relationship, and that was a difference in views on religion. Shaina is a very fundamentalist Christian, I think is a fair assessment from the outside.
I agree, yes.
She's a very fundamentalist Christian, and Kyle is a self-described atheist. So they had a conversation about religion before the engagement, which seemed to be the dividing factor in their relationship, but then Kyle came back and decided to propose to Shaina anyway. And in a lot of the conversation after that point, religion seemed to be at the kind of center of the tension between the two of them. Although, again, every once in a while in her little talking heads interviews, she would mention Shane a couple of times.
That
so I think,
really confused me.
Yeah, I'm sorry I didn't include that bit. Because we're focusing on religion, I didn't want to throw in too much of the drama.
But there was a moment where I thought she was talking about herself in the third person.
Oh. I mean, I wouldn't have been surprised.
Yeah, Shane for short.
So I basically at the end of it, well, not the end of the show, but about halfway through the show, actually, they break up. And they break up the engagement because of religion. And when I was watching it, because I enjoy watching it, I was not initially watching this for work purposes. But at the end of their time, and Kyle's in an interview post-breakup, and he says something along the lines of, "I can't believe in this day and age religion is a deal breaker." Which I thought was a very fascinating comment, because it seems pretty obvious to me that religion can be a deal breaker.
Yes.
So I decided that I wanted to talk about religion and secular societies and secularization. And then when I rewatched it, I realized there's actually a lot more that we can be unpacking. So the way that I foresee this episode kind of unfolding, the structure, if you will, that we will be doing, is that I wanted to kind of start with the conversation of religion and secularization, because I think that is at the core of a lot of their arguments, is Kyle thinking of more of a secular idea while Shaina is not, for lack of any better else, but maybe we'll complicate this idea as we get into secularization. But at the heart of it is also the idea that religion does impact a lot around a person than just their religion and who they're praying to. It impacts a lot of their understanding of the world around them, of their own place, of their role in society. And gender roles, in particular, comes up a lot in conversation. And so I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about the gender roles and how Shauna's religion feeds into that, and how Kyle seems to not really realize how much Shauna's religion feeds into that. But then also talking about family dynamics. There is a heavy presence of Kyle's mother and Shaina's father in the conversation. And so I thought maybe we would also talk about that. So if that sounds okay with you, Aled, I think...
Yes, that sounds absolutely fine by me.
I think we will start getting into it. So I think maybe we should start with just the idea of secularization when we talk about a secular society. So do you mind, because I think you might be able to do this a bit better than I can, do you mind explaining for our lovely listeners what the secularization thesis actually is?
Okay, so the core, very broadly speaking, the idea of secularization is simply is society becoming more secular. Religion not being as important to people and not playing as important a part in public life. Now, when you get into the depths of the thesis, that's where it's really at, is the role religion plays in public life. A lot of the secularization thesis concerns the idea of religion still being there, but being a private affair. So religion doesn't play the part that it once played in politics, for example. It doesn't play the part that it may do in medical ethics, as it once did. The reality, however, is a bit more complex. I'm quite critical of the secularization thesis. And part of the reason is that a lot of it is directed towards the idea of engagement with institutional religion. Particularly Western secularization theses come down to things like church attendance. And church attendance in let's use Britain as an example. In the Church of England, for example, are in decline. We all know that. But when you do examine religion on the ground, it's quite clear that religion thrives. And maybe not, thrives may sound like I'm giving it an endorsement, but religion does flourish, or that's even worse. Religion is happening on the ground.
Religion happens and it exists.
Religion happens and it exists. And I think I've made it clear on the podcast in the past, and I think you agree with me, Vivian. I mean, obviously, tell me if I'm putting words in your mouth, that religion and culture can't be separated. I wouldn't even say they're two sides of the same coin. Sometimes I think they are just the same. We are talking about the same thing. And the secularization thesis tends to create a distinction between religion on the one hand and society on the other, and culture on the other, and that sometimes the two mix, and then in other ways they don't, and that's where secularization happens. And that's why I've always found the study of new religions quite interesting, because in the post-World War II period, new religions had a boom in popularity with a variety of them. So while there was this idea of, well, secularization is happening, people aren't going to church anymore, people may not be identifying as Christians much anymore, people were turning to other things. And that doesn't necessarily mean they're turning to very specialized new religions. Sometimes it can be something like somebody buying healing crystals, for example, in Glastonbury, or and of course the concept we always like to come back to, pick and mix religion and bricolage. I love saying bricolage with a bit of gusto.
It's the best thing Levi Strauss ever did.
Bricolage, yeah, absolutely. But this is where we see processes like globalization and mediatization as well, because I think a lot of what we see in the decline of institutional religion, I guess discussed in the secularization thesis, is actually a process of globalization as well. I can go on the internet and have a Zoom call with a Theravada Buddhist monk who can share his beliefs about Buddhism with me, and I can sit here at my home and think, I want to try some of that. I want to try meditation, for example, and I can do that while still believing in Jesus. I can do that while still believing in life after death. I can create my own religion almost, and I think that goes hand in hand with the globalization process, in the idea of the world becoming smaller and more mediatized, is that people are now given this spiritual marketplace. And I don't necessarily mean in the consumerist sense of paying money for it, simply that there are religious ideas competing with each other for people's attention. Whereas in a time before internet access, in a time before digital TV and so forth, people's access to religion was far more limited. So you would find in localized spaces, more people would be going to their local church. But now people have opportunities to find religion elsewhere, and in a much more private sense as well. Individualized religion is definitely something that plays a significant part in the religious landscape today. I always have to add the caveat, especially when I'm talking to my students, in that individualized religion has always existed because people are individuals and they have their own interpretations. So this isn't a new phenomenon, but it's something I think has been amplified by secularization and globalization. So when it comes to Kyle, bringing it back on topic, this this chap in Love is Blind, the impression I got from what he was saying is that his understanding was very much in the vein of the secularization thesis of, well, religion just doesn't really exist in the public domain anymore. People just do it at home now. Or rather, it's a private affair. And a lot of this went for Shaina as well. They both framed religion, in my opinion, as belief. It all came down to, does God exist or not? Now, Shaina did speak about how it enriches her life and stuff, but she didn't give much more of that. That would have been really interesting because we could have seen more of the everyday aspects of what it does for her rather than just she believes in God. But the conversation did come down to the God debate.
Well, we saw a small inkling of that aspect for Shaina in the very first conversation that I linked anyway. I'm sure they've had conversations prior to that, but she mentions that she had been previously engaged, and her phrasing of it was, "God said no."
No, yes.
Which, interestingly, Kyle said, well, what does that mean? And then she went into why the relationship didn't work, which part of me, I was wondering more about. I mean, maybe it says a lot more about what I'm interested in, but that I was a lot more interested in how she understands these aspects of life happening as interpreting as God saying no. But it shows that I think in something that is, regardless of how you view Shaina, which I think as we get into this, we'll probably show a little bit more about how she's... I am slightly on her side in some aspects of the more religion side of the conversation, but she was a bit of a... she wasn't perfect in a lot of other aspects. And...
No,
but I think... regardless of how you view her, going through something like that, of ending an engagement, can be incredibly emotionally difficult to go through, regardless of who instigates it. And the fact that she is able to interpret the experience as God saying no, meaning that this higher power took control and said, actually... this is the better option for you, and that made her feel better in the decision to call off an engagement.
I think Kyle very much took that as a figure of speech.
Yes, I think so as well. Which I think shows, again, a very huge difference between people who study religion regularly, that as soon as she said that, I went, oh, should I grab a notebook? Yeah,
he definitely, in my opinion, took that as a figure of speech, and that's demonstrated by how throughout all these conversations I watched between them, to him it was simply inconsequential, because his atheism clearly doesn't matter to him, in that he doesn't write polemics or anything. It's just a case of, okay, we got here, there was a big bang, we evolved, that's it. And I think he applies that value that he puts on the Big Bang Theory to how Shaina feels about God. In that it's just a domino effect of how we got here. rather than understanding it as something that actually impacts who she is as a person and her values as well.
Yeah, which obviously is part of the other aspects that we're going to talk about is her religious views have clearly impacted her understanding of gender dynamics, of her understanding of a family. Just to put more simply, even those really basic things. There is also very interesting comments from her brothers when we meet her family that has a very clear understanding of nationalism and how religion probably is impacted by that. So yeah, I think we see glimpses of how much religion has impacted her, even if she wasn't very good at vocalizing it and communicating it.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I always find really interesting about teaching is you kind of do, at least teaching in the social sciences and in the humanities, you do kind of half your job is teaching on certain topics and ideas of instructing people, hey, there's this theory or this thing that exists and let's talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
But the other half of the time, you are taking something that they already know exists and you're kind of problematizing it and breaking it down and kind of saying that it might not exist.
Yeah.
And I find that I have to do that a lot with secularization. And the idea of a secular society, particularly with first years, they kind of come in and they will automatically talk about the UK and the US in particular as being very secular societies.
Yes.
And we have to sit there and really pick it apart in order to question it and to show that it's not as separate as people like Kyle and sometimes my students like to think of it as. And one of my favorite ways that I always do it is I will pick a religion at random, typically a non-Christian religion, and I will ask them if they believe that the next election the UK would elect a prime minister who was fill in the blank. Islam gets a lot of conversation going.
Yes. There was really interesting conversations about David Cameron when he was Prime Minister, that on the surface he's a church-going Christian, but there was a lot of discourse about the fact that he was secretly atheist. And I'm not giving I don't know what the answer is. I'm just reporting on the discourse here.
Yeah, we don't know David Cameron personally.
But no, mercifully not. But the question of whether he believed in God or not, and that was just from a Christian perspective, was a question, because, and I remember reading articles about it, is he Britain's first atheist prime minister? And that was interesting in itself. So yeah, when you tip that on its head and then say, okay, well, let's forget Christianity for a moment.
Yeah, like let's say that they are still religious, but something that you don't necessarily recognize. Pagan is always a really fun one to throw in as well, because particularly a lot of first years don't think that pagans actually exist. So it's particularly fun to have that conversation of, would the UK elect a Druid prime minister, and would they elect a Druid prime minister before they elect a Muslim one? So yeah, I basically saying that I do agree with you that secularization is not as necessarily as clear cut as a lot of people like to assume that it is, and that it's existing, and not even just politics, but when we talk about religion and culture being at least religion being a circle within the giant Venn diagram of, not even a separate circle, like it's embedded in the idea of culture, which I don't really think that would be a good idea. It'd be like an amorphous blob. But sorry, but basically I think that you start to see how much like it impacts not just things like who you're going to vote for, but also who you marry for, the purposes of something like Love is Blind. I find it interesting that Kyle thinking of it as being a very, he doesn't use these exact words, but his view of it as being something that's very secular, so something that is more private, something that is at home. That's where you're gonna be with her, like
yes.
You're getting married,
and he certainly didn't address at all the aspects of morality and not even just morality, just understandings of the world and everyday life. And, there were the questions of, how would we raise the kids and things like that. And there was a really interesting moment, I thought, when he did his talking heads moment to the camera. And I'm paraphrasing, but he said that Shaina has some extreme views on religion. And I've got some extreme views on religion too. And I had to pause at that moment because I thought, okay, what did Shaina say? She did say that she's a creationist. She did entirely reject the Big Bang Theory and evolution. What I would say is that in the grand scope of religious extremism and what religious extremism can entail, I wouldn't say she's an extremist. I would definitely say she's fundamentalist in many regards. But at the same time, and I don't know if he was saying this to try and be nice, because he was, to his credit, he was always trying to see the best in her, even when they were having these conflicts, I think, because I don't think anything he felt was extreme either. Believing that the Big Bang Theory and Darwinian evolution disproves the existence of a creator God is not an extreme view either. I was wondering if you'd had any thoughts on that. I just thought that was quite an interesting moment.
Yeah, I think that it was revealed that he really didn't have extreme views on religion. In fact, he kind of kept saying that he would be, he was happy to completely change what he did religiously for her. When they were breaking up, for example, he said, well, because she said something about, I won't compromise on it. And he said, well, I'm the one doing the compromising. And she said, well, you don't have to, and you shouldn't have to. And I think that potentially, they were both very bad at communicating from a relationship
they were.
Therapist standpoint. They were very terrible at it. But I think that one of the things that I think he was very bad at communicating was he liked to say he felt about these things very strongly, but he didn't feel very strongly about them. And potentially maybe she would have felt differently if he had been very open about saying, I believe in evolution, but maybe with a bit of time and reading and thought, I can say thank God for evolution. Which would have been a very different conversation.
But would that have been a fundamentally dishonest conversation?
Well, I don't know if she would have seen it as the exact same thing as what she sees, but it would have been a lot closer than God doesn't exist because of evolution. And there are many, many, many Christians that say, thank God for evolution.
Oh, yes.
And so, it wouldn't be that outside of the realm. But yeah, I think he had a lot of trouble understanding that religion can be important to somebody.
Yes.
And that was fascinating.
And that it clearly matters to Shaina more than simply a quick explanation of how we got here. Yeah.
I think when they broke up, there was that interesting bit of a conversation, too, where he said something about how, but isn't this more important? And she was like, nothing is more important. Nothing is bigger.
Yeah, and he could not comprehend that at all, could he?
And he really seemed to not even understand what she was saying.
Yeah. We had a brief chat about this yesterday after I'd watched the episode, and I was saying to you that a lot of what Kyle said about religion, a lot of the ways he approached religion reminded me of Tyler. And Tyler's idea of social evolutionism, or the idea that religion would be phased out by the scientific method.
Yeah, I was about to say, do you want to explain that a little bit of Edward Tyler?
Edward Bernard Tyler.
There you go.
So Edward Bernard Tyler saw religion as something that would understood religion as an explanation for this worldly phenomena that we couldn't explain, and that eventually science would come in and give us the appropriate explanation that is testable and empirical, in a way that religion can't, and that eventually religion would be phased out, that, simply put, society would evolve beyond it. Which we've discussed previously in our episode on the Star Trek episode, Who Watches the Watchers, which definitely presents the idea of a society that has evolved beyond religion, and that religion is part of a... If you picture Darwinian evolution from a biological perspective, but apply that to a social perspective, you can see that... sorry, I've lost my train of thought. I was doing really well.
Yeah, I mean, I think because in that one, we also kind of talked about how this idea of kind of cultural social evolution is inherently racist.
Yes, well, I was going to say it's because when applied to... Because it's a mindset as well, isn't it? It's more than simply... Because, as I was saying, what Kyle was saying reminded me of that, and I very much doubt that Kyle has read Tyler.
Oh yeah,
and that's not intended as a diss. I
think as I said in our text thread when he was watching it, which also it was fun to get your messages as you were clearly in the midst of watching. It was very entertaining to me. But I even messaged in there that if you can avoid reading Tyler, then you definitely should continue to avoid reading Tyler. So it is not at all a diss.
So it's a mindset as well, isn't it? It's a mindset of a society that is inherently better than what came before and more advanced.
Mm-hmm. And the Tylorian idea of the ultimate, like the social equivalent of the upright, fully erect man in the social evolution or the biological evolution thing, was an atheistic society, and it part of, and I this isn't important to the Kyle conversation, but if we're bringing it up, I always like to reiterate it in case people haven't heard the Star Trek episode, which if you haven't, go listen to it. But
I really enjoyed that one.
We spent a lot more time on this idea there, but I did want to reiterate the fact that when people like Tyler did his research at the time, they saw that the equivalent of going to, say, an African tribe was the equivalent of looking at old England, which is obviously ignoring many cultural and social and geographical issues that can kind of impact a lot of things. But they also saw the social evolution as happening over time with you as a child. So as you grew up, you also went through this process. So studying children was the same as studying an African tribe, which was the same as studying really old historical England.
And where do we
so
even
this
begin
is why it
with...
is inherently racist.
Yeah, where do we even begin with that?
It's not a very good view of it.
It's essentially looking at other cultures and seeing them further back on the evolutionary chain.
Yeah, and unfortunately, Tyler was very popular among non-academic audiences in his time. And I mean, I say that this is like the 1850s or whatever.
Yeah, he's a very old dude now.
He's very old white dude, like most scholars that people talk about in the study of religion. But he was very popular amongst non-academics in his time, and unfortunately, because of that, a lot of his views have impacted a lot of the way that people have understood culture and religion and even myth going forward. I firmly believe, I have no proof of it, but my hypothesis is that the idea of myth, the word myth meaning a falsehood, comes from the Tylorian idea of myth as being an explanation.
That's really interesting.
And that it is an inherently racist concept. I have no proof.
No, but I can see the groundwork of what you're saying there.
Yes,
because
but it
religion is an explanation. It's
an actively working hypothesis. So Tyler, I think, has definitely had a lot of impact on the way that particularly white Western societies understand religion and the idea of secularization. And whether or not he has read Tyler doesn't impact the fact that Kyle has been impacted by Tyler.
Yes. And I very much saw that at work, that he... And then that's what really rung for me when he said, well, I can't believe in this day and age Because from his perspective, we had reached that Tylorian utopia of, well, science has now explained how we got here, and therefore religion, which is just belief, of course, nothing else. I'm being facetious there, obviously. A religion, which from this perspective is entirely belief, has been completely displaced. So in this day and age, I can't believe this is happening, thinks Kyle. Because I feel like we're giving Kyle a bit of a rough time. He did come across as a nice guy.
He did come across as a very nice guy. I think we're giving him a rough time purely in the
academic study of religion
aspect of it.
Yeah.
To kind of pull back and talk a little bit more about the situation in its entirety, I do think that Shaina, as we've said before, Shaina was not a very good communicator. It was an issue that she was actually very honest about as being an issue that she went through throughout the show. But what I did find interesting was there was a point where Kyle said something, and I think it was right near the end, where he said, I feel like this is coming out of nowhere. Why wouldn't you have said something that this was important up until now? To which I wanted to rewind to literally all of the clips that I pulled out up until this point, where Shaina says, this is really important to me. I think this is an issue. I think this is a core fundamental issue between our values. I think sometimes he maybe looked at things with a little bit of rose-colored glasses. I think he really liked her. He clearly did. He had very good intentions.
Yes.
He was very kind. He never pushed her outside of, I think, her comfort zone. I know they never slept together. They, at least as far as I'm aware, they didn't live together.
I'm glad you keep notes on these things.
Yes. But the idea meaning that, like, he didn't try to push her too hard on those things that are clearly very important to her and part of her religious beliefs, whether Kyle realized that or not. So he was very kind. I shouldn't be giving a man props for not raping somebody, but
but that's where we are in 2022.
But this is where we are.
Gosh.
But he seemed like a nice guy. He gave her his mom's engagement ring because he was that sincere, and he saw his mom, which we'll talk about. He mentions multiple times as she was very religious. And so he saw some of these aspects in Shaina and therefore thought that it was a good fit. So as much as we are giving Kyle a little bit of a hard time, I think, again, he seemed like a nice guy. And Shaina also she probably should have just not accepted the engagement from the beginning.
That's the other thing as well, isn't it?
She seemed very shocked and like she didn't really know what to do. Although, to be fair, I think that if I was on TV when someone had proposed to me, I don't know if I would have the guts to say no.
But then you wouldn't go on this show.
But I wouldn't go on the show. Part
of the rules of this show is that if you progress to a certain stage, apparently, you accept the proposal.
Yes, and I am also in a weird situation because I've never been proposed to. So I don't even know how I would treat a normal proposal. But
well, this is the other thing, is that when she opened that engagement ring, it was quite clear she didn't want it. Or at the very least,
she was clearly very gobsmacked. She didn't really know what to do.
Yeah.
She was uncomfortable.
Yes, there was a like, I know he couldn't see her face, but if he could, I don't think that's the face he would have wanted to have seen.
Yes.
I know when I proposed to my wife, I would have been a little bit worried if her reaction had been like Shaina's.
Yeah.
Because I did that. I was like something out of Dickens, Vivian. I was down on one knee. We were on a bridge in the forest with a nice little stream going beneath it.
Well, you did wear a top hat to your wedding, so I can imagine that it was...
Yes, but I will admit that top hat was mostly for me. But yes, but speaking of the engagement and things like that, and how it clearly mattered to her that, they didn't sleep together or anything like that. There was a moment where, just before they got talking about religion in one of the clips they sent to me, they were talking about a home life that they could have. And it was a very nuclear family, very heterosexual, very almost right-wing understanding of the family life. So we'll get to talking about their family in a moment, but I got the impression that this is a very right-wing family and a very right-wing branch of Christianity.
And I think this is where we can get into talking about the gender roles.
Yes, let's do that.
Because this became... I mean, the amount of times that Shaina mentioned things that I personally cringed at. But, if that's what you want, that's what you want. At least you're honest about it. In that conversation, this is, I think, the very first one, the clip that I gave, they were having a conversation. He's a contractor, Kyle is, so he's kind of always outside working with his hands, doing a quote-unquote manly job. So he's mentioning that, let's just say, as a scenario, I'm outside, I'm working all day in the cold, outside, working with my hands. What do you do to help comfort me as a wife when I come home? And her response was, I will have dinner on the table and I will rub your feet.
Yes. And she also liked the fact that Kyle was a construction worker, wasn't he?
Yeah.
And there was one point when he was doing his talking heads to the camera moment where he said she likes the fact I'm a manly man. Of course, there's no such...
He grew out his beard before meeting her.
Yeah, there's no such thing...
Because he wanted to look more manly.
Yeah, there's no such thing as a manly man, just the patriarchal idea of what a masculine man is. And this manly man that Kyle was somebody who worked in construction and was therefore A, very strong, and B, liked to get his hands dirty. So basically the complete opposite of me. Because I don't like either of those things. I think I only lift, methodological weights. I don't know.
Methodological weights.
Oh, that was an attempt at humour. But anyway, yes. So there was that role of, well, he is going to be the hyper-masculine man with a very masculine job, and he's going to grow out his beard before meeting her because he wants to look that manly. And she will have dinner prepared on the table and will rub his feet because he's had such a hard day of being on his feet all day as a man. Whereas obviously as a woman sat in the house, she's just sat down all day doing nothing, right? Again, I'm being facetious in case my sarcasm isn't coming across.
Yeah, so there was a lot of that discussion of the femininity versus masculinity conversation. He brings it up as well when they go to meet each other, the fact that he grew out his beard because he knew that she liked him to look very manly. He also, I know, he also says in there that he meets her and he thinks that she's incredibly attractive. And he says, I feel like a slouch, and I know that she doesn't care about my appearance.
I'm
but
stood
she
next to a supermodel, and I think
he says she clearly puts a lot of effort into her appearance, which again I think is part of that. You have dinner on the table, you wear a nice dress, you have your makeup on, and you rub his feet. Like,
you look good for your man.
You look good for your man, and the man doesn't need to look good for his woman. He needs to be outside with a beard and working construction.
Yeah, building bricks and whatnot.
But this is, and again, like, when we're talking about, like, her fundamentalist religious upbringing, we can see how much this would have been impacted by that. This would have been part of this conversation of your role as woman, his role as man, and that is, these types of things are painted out often in people's religion. So, I don't know, the fact that he didn't pick up on this, but, this is why we need to be teaching religion in school. Do religious studies, not teaching. I don't know.
Yeah,
anyway,
I know what you mean.
So one of the other ones that I thought was really interesting was when she was breaking up with him at the end. She says that she needs a man to spiritually lead her. So the idea of him being an atheist wasn't just a problem from the perspective of how will we raise our kids? Will you go to church with me on Sunday? I don't want you making fun of me for not believing in evolution type of conversation. It was also a very core understanding that she needed to be, as a woman, needed to be led by a man in many aspects of her life, including her religion.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I thought that comment was particularly interesting. So,
Yes.
and I think it wasn't very hidden. I was rewatching these clips with my husband, who hasn't seen the whole season, so he just watched only those clips with me, like how you did. And as soon as she said that, he went, "Oh."
Yeah.
But like he picked up on that, so it wasn't exactly a hidden idea.
No. And then there was that meeting with the family.
The family. I think this will be kind of tied into our discussion of family dynamics, because I think you can't really talk about the gender roles without talking about family dynamics. Obviously, we've already kind of talked about how she was expected to be essentially in charge of the family, and he's out working construction. This sounds like I really hate construction workers. It's just...
No, it's just a stereotypically masculine job.
It is just, everything about these two people were so stereotypical what you would imagine happening in this situation.
Yeah.
But yeah, so she had 3 brothers. Her father and her mother were all there to meet Kyle. And now first I want to comment. When you are an anthropologist and a sociologist, I am sure, and you go into an environment to do research, whether you are going into someone's home to do interviews or you are going into a church room, watching where people are sitting in the room is half of what is interesting. Yes,
I have found myself sat in very interesting places in relation to other people in the past.
Yes. And I think sitting in the back of a room, of like a church room, is always my favorite place, because you can watch everybody. Sometimes people won't let you sit in the back, particularly if you're a woman. But it is an interesting place to be, because you can kind of see everyone else and how they're interacting and where their body language is and how they are positioned in the room. This meeting was fascinating from a position of where people were sat. The mom was in the furthest corner. She was in a separate chair from everybody else, and she was leaned back. She was leaned back with her arms over her, seemingly relaxed, but pulled back and away. Most of the guys were leaned in, and they were forming the rest of the semicircle around Shaina and Kyle.
Yeah. I especially felt with the brothers that they were just one step away from flashing a lamp in his face and giving him the 3rd degree.
Yes.
Because they were sat especially close to them.
2 of them in particular were sat very close to him.
And they were the ones who did most of the
one that
talking.
I think was the most vocal was sat, leaned into their face.
Yeah, I think he asked 3/4 of the questions.
He did, yeah. At least that we saw.
Yeah.
Which, talking about gender dynamics, they were, do you do sports? Are you a godly man? Which, funnily enough, Kyle didn't understand the phrase, are you a godly man? Which I thought was particularly funny.
Yeah. I mean, it answered the question.
And as long as you're an American.
Yeah. I mean, what does that even mean? Because that can mean a number of things, can't it? Because sometimes it can be America by nationality, but it could also mean an allegiance to America. Like one has moved to America, they may not be American by birth, but they have embraced the American dream, as it were. Because I find sometimes the way that particularly patriotic Americans speak about America is they talk about America as a way of thinking, as well as a nationality, that America is an ideology.
Yes.
And so that question could have meant 2 things. I suspect it meant nationality.
I think I don't think the brother was consciously aware of this, but I think it was both. I think Kyle looked white, but he could also very easily pass for not white.
Mm-hmm.
He's half Native American, I believe. So, I could imagine it, which means that he's more American than everyone else in that room, but,
Yeah.
just from that standpoint.
That's what he should have said.
But, well, yeah, but he's too nice to say things like that, I'm sure. But I don't know how much of it was that kind of probing. But I think that there is also a very intense connection between certain types of politics, certain ideologies, which obviously is connected to politics. I'm not trying to say that those are separate things, but and certain religious views that are inherently connected to being American. And I know this from having been American. I still am.
Very interesting slip of the tongue there.
Yes, I have been here for a very long time, but I do still have a passport. But I had gotten, in my past, when I lived in America, I had very many people tell me that I am un-American because of my beliefs, my ideologies, and my politics. Which is very interesting. Which I think is also a kind of a separate conversation, which we'll probably get into in the future episode
because I was about to say
podcast.
that sort of discourse, from what I've seen, is becoming quite prevalent in Britain as well.
Yes,
and the idea of Britishness. So yes, we should definitely put a pin in that.
Yes, but I suspect that the brother was picking up, whether he was aware of it or not, was echoing that mentality while also thinking he's just being very patriotic.
Yeah, that you love it. You can guarantee that we didn't see it, but you can guarantee that family has an American flag in the garden.
Oh, definitely.
And maybe even a Trump Pence sign that's still up.
But yes, so there was the family. Her family was very clearly embedded in those. They were very excited that he rode dirt bikes.
It's just it's just so heteronormative.
Yes, it is very much that. I mean, this show in general is very heteronormative. Most reality TV dating shows are very heteronormative. But this show in particular is quite bad about it. Most of them have these conversations. I don't know how much of it is also because you don't typically get people on there that say, for example, don't want children. And I'm not saying that only non-hetero people don't want kids. But I think they feed into that
nuclear
heteronormative
family
dynamic of the family of the mom, the dad, the 2.5 kids, and a white picket fence. They really feed into that image a lot, which is heteronormative in its basis of a lot of other aspects as well. But this, I think, for that reason, Shaina actually wasn't that off of a casting.
No, she didn't seem to be at all. And I also think that had they been spiritually aligned, shall we say, they would have clicked. All the other pieces did line up, or at least it seemed to from the clips that I saw. Obviously, because I only watched the religion-y clips, a lot of what I saw was them at odds with one another.
Yes.
So it was then kind of strange then to hear Carl say, "Oh, Shayna's so great," I love spending time with her. I love her voice and things like that. And I was thinking, oh, okay, so clearly other things have been happening, because from where I'm sat right now, it's like I've been watching a reality TV show of Dawkins and McGrath. Not that McGrath is a creationist. There was a lot going on between those two.
There was, yes. And in that case, it's a really great case study to use for this, for our purposes.
I was wondering if the brothers during that family meet, and I know we can't have a straight answer to this, were essentially pushed by producers or on-set crew or whatever to ask if he was godly. Because it had dominated their conversation that he wasn't godly. And the way they came out with it was very accusatory. Because when Shaina mentioned God saying no to her previous marriage and mentioned believing in God, she said it very casually. And she said it in a way of, oh yeah, and of course you believe in God too.
Yeah.
You know, he had to say to her, no, actually I don't. But she kind of put words in his mouth and said, because she just assumed that he would. Whereas the way the brothers questioned him was giving him the third degree of, we smell an atheist. Did you get that vibe? The question to me seemed quite loaded of...
A bit. I mean, I think a lot of his questions were very abrupt and loaded sounding.
They did not seem like they liked him.
No, like the very first question that we see is he says, "Tell me something real." Which, what does that mean?
Evolution.
But yeah, so he says, "Tell me something real," and then they, understandably, Kyle went, "What does that mean?"
Poor Kyle, he really went through it during that meeting.
And so he says, you know, like, why did you pick Shaina? And Kyle, I don't think, played this very well. He was clearly very uncomfortable and awkward. But I think every single thing, you know, even the "do you play sports" was very loaded feeling. It was very aggressive.
Oh, yeah, because you know the next question, well, maybe I'm being a little bit British about this and the experiences I've had with meeting men, but the next question is going to be, who do you support?
Yeah.
And then you've got the other religion playing part and the allegiances that are drawn there. And I thought it was really interesting how after he met the family, there was a quick clip, a quick talking heads clip of Shayna's mother saying, I think Kyle's a really sweet guy, I like him, but I cannot give their marriage my blessing.
Yeah.
Because he was an atheist. Nothing else. Because he was an atheist. And therefore, he culturally was incompatible with Shayna. And she was very clear about that, wasn't she? There was no, so I said, I cannot give him my blessing. And then what I thought was quite interesting is, I think Kyle clearly knew it didn't go all that well, because then, just before they break up, they're walking along together by a river or something, and they say something like, oh, I think that went well, and then he immediately undermined that by saying to her, so what happened when I left? Did they talk shit about me?
Yeah.
Which is not the sort of thing you say after it went really well. You know,
yeah.
And I imagine they did. Not necessarily
probably
do that, but you know, but certainly it would have been commented on of, you know, it's a shame he's not godly. And you know, Shayna's mum even said to camera, I can't, you know, I don't want him with my daughter.
That mom definitely would have said that to Shayna.
Yeah, if she's going to say it on, you know, international TV, then she's gonna say it to Shaina. But when he said that, I thought, well, that's what I thought.
Yep. Is that when you sent me the message saying he's gonna get his little heart broken?
Yes, he is gonna get his little heart broken, because he did seem so invested, and he was naive to the point where he didn't see that this was going to be an issue. And, you know, on the other side of the coin, I do think that it was quite clear to her all along that it wasn't going to work out. And, you know, but like you were saying earlier, when you're on the spot and things like that, and there's cameras around you.
I could imagine being in a situation where I do something and then go, I probably should have just said no. But then thinking, well, I'm already in. Let's just see if things turn around.
Mm.
But I don't think she was good enough at communication to... I don't think either of them were good at communication enough to actually work past it, but I do think that it probably was a possibility if they were better at communicating and discussing things. Like, I think I don't remember if I told you, but before we started this, but I was telling my husband when we were watching it, if in that room with his family, or with her family, if he had said, you know, I grew up in a very religious household. My mom was very religious. Even though I'm not anymore, I see the good that upbringing gave me. I'm happy that our kids would have such a strong founding through their mother. Like, if this was the phrasing, he's still not saying, oh, well, I'm going to go to church.
That's the interesting thing then, isn't it? Because to me, that shows how he understands religion as pure belief in God. Because he mentioned several times throughout the show about how he thought his mum was the bee's knees. And that was really sweet, you know. I want to give you my mum's engagement ring because you remind me of my mum. My mum was religious and she was amazing. But he never put the two together. His mother was amazing in spite of her being religious.
Yes.
That was the projection he was giving.
Yeah, I think he needed to have the understanding of the slightly, even a smaller net. It didn't even have to be as big as we understand it to be on this podcast, but just a slightly wider net of the impact of religion. I think he if he understood that, I think he could have turned it around. I think if that was the phrasing, I think Shaina would have felt better. I think her family would have felt better.
But they weren't meant to be anyway.
They weren't meant to be anyway, but I
taking our academic hats off for a moment, that was just not a good pairing.
But I am saying that I think I don't think it was necessarily, like, on paper, just seeing the arguments, I don't think it was necessarily doomed from the beginning. But I do think that once you get in the personalities of these people, that it was a bit more doomed from the beginning.
There was also and I appreciate this isn't necessarily linked to the religion angle, but the way they were sat together on the sofa meeting the parents just seemed very awkward. And okay, that's an awkward scenario anyway, because camera crews around meeting the parents for the first time, whatever. But as we discussed before we started recording, the moments they first meet each other in person,
yes,
given that they were engaged at this point, I mean, were they though? What does it mean to be engaged? But given that they were engaged at this point, the chemistry was not there. Even though Kyle was trying to... If you think of relationships as a spark, Kyle is there in the corner, rubbing some twigs together, trying to get a flame going, and failing miserably. Because he just strolls up to open arms of, oh, there you are, the love of my life, you're beautiful. And he goes to kiss her, and he goes in for that kiss. He goes for a smooch.
Does.
And she does kiss him back, but it doesn't look like she's happy about it. And she's leaning back a bit. And, that's fine. If she doesn't want to kiss him, she doesn't want to kiss him. I'm not criticising her here at all. I'm just saying that it was a really awkward meeting. Oh, yeah. It said a lot, didn't it? Because I remember I actually messaged you at the time saying, wow, that kiss was awkward.
Yup.
And you knew exactly what I was referring to.
I knew exactly. I mean, granted, I think that was the only scene where we've seen them kiss, was that one.
It's probably the only time that they did.
Maybe. I know that she left him in the little getaway in Mexico that everyone goes to. Pretty early. I was trying to find the clip of the conversation that they had before then, but it seemed very, it was short and it wasn't very detailed, and it was mostly a conversation about where they were going to be sleeping. And he was trying to see about whether or not they would sleep in the same bed, and then that caused her to leave. Which, again, probably would have been nice to include as far as seeing how things impacted her religion, but it was so short, and I couldn't find it in enough time.
Yeah, could you expand on, because I didn't see this clip, what do you mean by leave?
So, basically, they all go to Mexico,
mm-hmm.
And they even have little meetups with everybody else, so everyone gets to see all the other people that were in the pods. It's mostly like kind of a nice getaway of getting to know each other really tight before you go back to normal life. She packed her bags and left Mexico and went back home.
Right, okay.
Like a couple of days early.
Because he suggested sleeping in the same bed.
I believe so. It's been a while since I saw it. But I don't remember if he suggested or if he tried to more firmly get it. But it was a conversation about sleeping arrangements. And then she left. Kind of in the middle of the night when he wasn't able to be there to, like, stop her. Which I kind of don't blame her for. It kind of sucks for him, but at the same time,
you kind of got to respect her for being so dramatic in the dead of night.
And also, like, I am personally so unable to have conflict that I probably would do something similar purely in order to not have to deal with it. But I think that my understanding of Shaina is that she is a bit on the dramatic side, so I think it was a bit more for that than
yeah, there was a dramatic streak, and I've got to respect someone for a bit of drama, but
especially on TV. She definitely made this season a lot more interesting to watch, that's for sure.
That is very interesting. Well, Kyle and Shaina, if you're listening,
jeez,
thank you for enriching our conversation.
We'd be happy to have you on to talk about religion, I guess.
I mean, yeah. Why not? Come on the show and...
On the very slim chance that you come on.
I would, well, just one of you. It doesn't need to be both of you. That may be a bit awkward.
Oh, God, I don't know if I'd be able to facilitate
us navigating
that
two of them at the same time. But this is the problem with being an academic in the field of religion, is that when they were talking to each other in these pods, I was thinking, if I was sat in the corner of that room with the pen and paper, there would have been so many points where I would have said, sorry, could you clarify what you mean by that?
I know. That's why I feel that if me and you were ever on this show, I feel like we would end up turning it into a research paper before we ever got engaged to anything.
Oh my gosh, yes. Yeah, they would definitely hate us on that show. Because there were so many moments where I just thought, okay, hold up. If I was in that room, I'd have to ask them to explain what they mean by that.
Yeah.
And what they mean by this, and what they mean by that. Yeah, it was definitely something. So I was also texting a friend of mine at the time about it, who's in an album book club that Vivian and I do.
Oh, right, okay.
And I told him that Vivian had made me watch this show, and there was this couple who were gelling, but religion was getting in the way. And he said, "Are you watching Love Is Blind?" And I said, "Yes." And there were several moments when I was texting him where I said, okay, because I was pausing throughout. I said, okay, I'm gonna continue now. I'll text you again in a bit. And then I said, I then sent him another message saying, 3 seconds in, I've unpaused. I've paused again, because as soon as I unpaused, they called each other brainwashed.
Oh, yeah, we didn't even talk about the brainwashed comment.
All I'll say about that I thought was quite interesting is that, paraphrasing again, because I don't have it written down in front of me, but he said something along the lines of, I don't appreciate being brainwashed. And she said, oh, well, I think you're brainwashed. And he replied to that and said, well, I could make the same argument. And I thought that was a very interesting phrasing there, because she out and out said, I think you are brainwashed, and he said, I could make the same, not I think you are too, but I could make the same argument. And I thought that seemed a little bit more of a less loaded way of talking about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, because Shaina also, we're talking about Kyle not being able to comprehend the idea of religion being important to someone. Shaina clearly couldn't comprehend the idea of atheism.
She also had I think she had difficulty understanding that religion didn't have to be important to somebody.
Yes, that it just wasn't a part of his life. I mean, it is a part of his life, but that he didn't see
whether or
it
not
as,
he recognizes it, it's a part of his life.
but he doesn't see it as part of his life, and that clearly baffled her as well. They were a great case study. Like, long-term listeners of the show will know that I'm not a reality TV person unless it involves cooking. But they were a really... They definitely scratched my religion itch.
Oh, well, I'm glad. Maybe in future I'll try to scramble up something else.
Well, that's the thing. Well, we've been talking for well over an hour.
We have.
And I don't feel the conversation has run out of steam whatsoever. And now a silence as soon as I say that.
I was going to edit out. No, yes, I think that we could probably talk about this for another couple of episodes, but we won't. But we could. I think that one of the things that I'm really looking forward to in this season of the podcast is the ability to do these very in-depth case study conversations, because last season we did a lot of the more general, like, let's talk about how food and religion impact and things like that, which is good, and it was important to get those kind of beginning things down of saying this is all the different types of stuff we can talk about. But now we get to really get into it, and I think when we really get into it, we have, you know, like just in this, you know, a couple of, it's probably like 10 minutes altogether of the clips that I put together. We have probably about 2 to 3 hours worth of conversation that we could pull out of it, you know.
They're incredibly rich clips.
So yeah, I'm really looking forward to being able to do this a lot in this season.
Yes.
And maybe in the future. I don't think we don't have another reality TV one planned, but
sure
I will start doing my research.
But if the producers of Love is Blind want more free promotion from our incredibly popular academic podcast, then they could start cherry picking participants of various religious persuasions.
Yeah, I'm sure the casting of Love is Blind care more about our podcast than...
Well, of course.
Than their own ratings of some sort.
Well, of course.
Well, if people want to talk to you about what reality shows you should watch in order to get detailed conversations about religion, Aled, where can they go?
They can find me on Twitter at Aled Thomas.
And you can talk to me about all things reality TV, not just the religion side of things. On Twitter and Instagram, I am at Vivian Asimos on both of those. And you can also check out my website, incidentalmythology.com. Well, thank you for joining me, Aled. As always, I always love these conversations with you. And thank you, listeners, for listening.
Bye for now.
Bye.